Placing respectful pranams to the lotus feet of His Holiness Jagadguru Dr. Shri Shivratri Rajendra Mahaswami Ji, and seeking the blessings of His Holiness Jagadguru Shri Shivratri Deshikendra Mahaswami Ji, we begin today's program, to which I welcome you all. Nelson Mandela has rightly said, education is the most powerful weapon that is used to change the world. Learning is not attained by chance, but sought for with ardor and diligence. It is fine to celebrate success, but it is most important to heed the lessons of failure. Sometimes some of our most unhappy customers are our greatest sources of learning. Good evening to one and all present here. I, Dr. Divya, will be the master of ceremony for today's webinar on quality management systems. One of the marvelous things about our institution is that it enables us to welcome people in a way we couldn't as individuals. Here, we pool our strength and share our work and responsibility. And we welcome people with smiles, which is a universal welcome. Now, I request Dr. Mamta, Coordinator, Department of Health System Management Studies, to welcome this august gathering.
Good evening to all. Seeking the blessings of His Holiness Swamiji, I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. P.A. Kushalappa, our Director Academics, our mentor for our department, and who has been the source of pillar for all our activities. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
I also welcome Ms. Sabha Siddiqui, who is a clinical project quality auditor and senior manager at Sanofi Pasteur, Mumbai, India. So welcome, madam, and I sincerely thank you. And we extend a warm welcome to this webinar and look forward for a very fruitful discussion with our participants. Yeah, I also welcome my faculty colleagues, Dr. Divya, Dr. Sujay, Ms. Smita, Mrs. Kanakavalli, and all others who are on board and have been behind the scenes working for the success of this webinar. I also welcome Dr. Ravindra, our Chief Information Officer, who has been coordinating all our online activities and has been the pillar for all our online endeavors. We welcome you, sir. I also welcome wholeheartedly all our students of MBA Hospital Administration, BBA, as well as MBA Pharmacy Administration students, and a special warm welcome to our online MBA Hospital Administration learners from across the African countries. So we welcome you all and look forward for a very fruitful discussions with each one of you. And I also take this opportunity to thank our authorities for giving us the permission to organize this webinar. So welcome once again to each one of you and looking forward for a very fruitful discussion. Over to you, Dr. Divya.
Thank you, madam, and we welcome you too. You left yourself out of the welcoming. Welcome makes someone who enters the place as guests leave as friends. Leaders don't tell us what to do, but show us how it is done. Dr. Kushalappa PA, Director Academics, has been a true leader and mentor to most of us in all our endeavors. We welcome you, sir, to this evening function and request you to kindly give the opening remarks, sir. Over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to join your webinar. And I first of all like to give my special thanks on behalf of the university authorities to Ma'am Sabha Siddiqui for having graciously accepted your invitation to address you all on the quality management systems, which is an essential part of your administration issues, especially in this pandemic when so many things have to be, the quality has to be looked into, and distribution of the vaccines. We have seen so many problems in the distribution of the remdesivir, although its role is questionable. But it has saved lives. It has not saved lives. That's a different issue. But to manage the distribution and especially the quality of anything like an oxygen concentrator, so I'm just talking of the pandemic. But this issue is on a broader plane. You have more to discuss on, and it's, I'm sure, very, very helpful to all the students who have joined. Have a very good academic interaction, students. And I'm sure you'll be benefited from listening to Ma'am Sabha Siddiqui. Thank you very much, Mamta and Divya and the team for calling me. Thank you.
So, Shavasna, thank you very much, Dr. Mamta, Dr. Divya, Dr. Kushalappa, for your kind words. So, I'll start sharing my screen and I'll...
Ma'am, just a minute. Smita,
yes.
Kindly introduce the guest. I think Divya is freezed.
Yeah, some network issue.
Some network issue, yeah. Yes. I think you can take over, Smita.
Hello all, good evening. Today it is my pleasure to introduce to you all today's speaker, Ms. Sabah Siddiqui. Before I start, let me share my screen. A quick introduction about the speaker. Madam has completed her diploma in clinical research from Bombay College of Pharmacy, bachelor in pharmacy from Pune University, post-graduation diploma in pharmacy from Maharashtra State Board. She has also completed her MBA in quality management from BITS Pilani. She also has a number of certifications in the field of quality assurance. A diversified clinical quality assurance professional with a demonstrated history of auditing in the pharmaceutical industry in the areas of GCP, GCLP, clinical data management, biostatistics, medical writing, and IVRS, pharmacovigilance, and regulatory. Coming back to her professional experience, Madam started her career in the year 1997 and worked as trainee at Horchest Marion Rizal till December 1997. From April 2001 to December 2005, she worked as retail pharmacist at Medicare Pharmacy. From January 2007 to June 2007 as document specialist at Pfizer Limited. From August 2007 to March 2010, Associate Quality Assurance at Suven Life Sciences. From April 2010 to March 2013, Manager, Regulatory Affairs, Quality Assurance and Training at QED Pharmaceutical Services Private Limited. From 2013 till present, she is working as Clinical Project Quality Auditor, Senior Manager at Sanofi Pasteur. We welcome you, Madam. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Smita. And okay, thank you all for your warm welcome and kind words. So I'll start off today's session and start sharing the slide. Is there anything, Dr. Divya, you're saying? I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you, Smita, for introducing Madam. Any questions, we request the participants to type in the Q&A and it will be answered at the end of all the sessions. Now we will begin the first session. Live as if you were to die tomorrow and learn as if you were to live forever. Learning is always a continuous process and we are here to learn the concepts of quality management systems. Over to you, Madam, for the first session.
Yes, sir, we can see the slides.
Sorry, this video is actually showing up on my screen, so it's actually covering it. Okay, no problem. I'll start off from here. So thank you all. So here I've already been introduced. So in short, I've got more than 20 years of experience. So mostly past 14 years, I've been in the field of clinical research. And we basically are involved in managing audits and scientific misconduct, serious GCP non-compliance. We are also responsible for leading and coordinating pre-approval inspection, which is normally outside of India, in routine as well as direct health authorities inspections. So as such, I'm responsible for Europe and Asia Pac team, but we also provide assistance to US team whenever it's required. Then coming up to first session is quality management system. So quality management system. So many of us, most of us, I would say, are familiar with quality management system. So quality management system is defined as a formalized system that documents structure, responsibility, and procedure to achieve effective quality management that is focused on the quality policy and quality objective in order to meet customer requirements. So basically, in simplest term, I would say that quality management system is a collection of business processes, what all we are doing, and functions aim at continuous improvement of quality to ensure customer expectation and requirements are met or exceeded. So here, when we talk in this session, we are going to focus on healthcare quality management system related to hospital quality management system. But one thing I would like to say is that please, when we look at the definition of quality management system, people usually ask, what is quality management system? How do we manage? And as we go further implementing or looking into the system, it's not clear. So basically the primary need is customer requirement. So that is our focus should always be customer requirement. And accordingly, the business processes are aligned. So here, this is a high level of representation of healthcare quality management system. And for healthcare quality management system, usually it is the patient experience that is the, I would say, the core requirement. And then other components of care we have in quality system elements. And then in figure 2, we see this is more detailed version. So in the center, we see is the core, and then middle circle, and then the outer circle. So I'll explain one by one what it is and how quality management system can be developed, I would say, in healthcare system, in hospital management. So here are some of the notes, but I'll directly come to this slide for explanation. So in the center, if you see the inner core, the core of the model outlines a result. Now, what exactly is expected from hospital, from the hospital? So that is how quality management system is developed. So what is our customer requirement? What is the main goal? It's exceptional quality, safety, and patient outcome. So on this criteria, we are developing the other, what you call, the elements that we have of quality management system. So then the core of the model involves those critical factors that are important to the health and well-being of patients, like exceptional quality, of course, quality and safety, it goes in parallel, and patient outcome. Now coming to the middle circle, so here we have patient identification and assessment, development. So the circle details 4 key components. Normally in patient care delivery system, we have broadly identified 4 components, that is identification and assessment, first step, and then development of treatment plan. It can be by primary or ancillary services, then delivery of care, and then transition of care to the next level of discharge. So these components basically represent the patient's typical experiential path through care delivery system process. So then the outer circle. Now this is the main circle, the 10 critical quality system elements that provide the infrastructure and basically provides a framework for supporting and influencing achievement, like basically what you want to achieve. So these are the elements that help us provide elements to achieve exceptional quality, safety, and patient outcome. So, and these basically outer circle and inner circle, and these all 3 circles, they're interrelated to each other. So if we see, like we have this interaction from the outer circle, from the quality elements that we have, and the second one is the middle circle, and then the center one. So any time we see if there is a breakdown in any of the components, like it can be very costly for the company, or even it may cause harm to the patient, and of course hospital's reputation. That is very important. Then first thing, I'll start off with leadership, commitment, planning, and review. So I'll just go through subsequent slides. Here I have listed down certain things, but I'm explaining here like leadership, planning, and these things. You all can go back and look into it. So first we'll see is leadership, commitment, planning, and review. So when it comes to leadership, commitment, planning, and review, so top management shall take accountability. Top management is responsible for the effectiveness of quality management system. Without their support, without their involvement, it's not possible to have a proper concrete quality management system. So leaders, basically they have to show commitment to quality by focusing and on ensuring that the processes that are implemented are effective and are in place. And they also have to directly engage with medical and administrative staff, and also to empower individuals by providing appropriate responsibility, like who's responsible for what, giving them, empowering them so that they can carry on with their assigned duties. That this means that hospital leaders at all times, they should be aware and should support quality efforts across the organization. Then leadership, they are also responsible for planning. Like hospital leaders are responsible for strategic planning function, including associated with quality, as quality in both clinical as well as administrative processes. So the planning starts right from the development stage. That is mission, vision, quality policy, goals, objective. And of course, goals and objective are basically strategically, decided, and has to be consistent with quality policy, mission, and vision of the organization. Then coming to the second part is feedback loop. So feedback loop basically verifies whether processes are functioning as expected, and they provide valuable information which may suggest process improvement actions which are necessary. So some of the examples, like the most common one is, plan, do, check, act, PDCA cycles. Then there are Lean Sigma projects. Then maybe some feedback we may get from the audits. And then other things like dissatisfaction survey, or receiving feedback from social media, website review, or getting feedback from patient, family, or patient input regarding care, and then also employee suggestions. So then the third element of quality management system is environment of care. So environment of care, this element addresses the hospital's physical environment, like, the building space and the arrangement and any special feature they have. So disaster and recovery plan are included in this element. It basically covers under this element. It also includes practices associated, like, maintaining calibration, cleanliness, physical safety, or general upkeep of the location and equipment. So those information should be captured under this part of quality management system, this element of environment of care. Then the fourth one is management of finances and support resources. So one of the most critical responsibility of any organization, I would say, is financial management. So budget management and planning for resource utilization should be, main focal point of any unit or department or division. And it requires like corporate level attention. Then coming to the next element is manage of information. So in hospital setting, healthcare setting, accurate patient information is a must. And of course, billing of services is also utmost important in the care of the patient. The documentation, what is expected, should be error-free. Now, the process associated with this quality system must assure that the records are matched, like, to the correct patient. Even though if it is compiled from different computer, different databases, different software, after it should be sorted appropriately and can be retrieved quickly. There should not be any kind of mismatch. Then coming to the sixth element is communication, education, and training. So healthcare organization should assess, the clinical and other competencies of the staff members, they need to possess, or any training that is required, so that they can meet patient and administrative requirements. So basically, this is the foundation of staff member success. How well, what is the qualification, training, and how well they are, how well this thing is communicated. Then coming to the seventh point is risk management. So in a hospital setting, quality system mainly involves preventing risk, of course, associated with patients and the care. Then all processes, like in the organizational structure, function, and resources, whatever is there, anything, can introduce risk. So if they're not designed properly or executed properly, there is chances of, taking in risk. So risk management is a very important part, and any organization should have this thing ready, like, if any kind of risk, how we're going to manage, or anytime they see anything that is deviating. So there has to be a process, something to document that and work on it, whether, and also evaluate what is the level of risk it carries to the organization or hospital setting. Then coming to management of change. So hospitals, any department, in fact, like in any organization, I would say, but hospital, taking an example of hospital, they have complex interaction of processes that, that facilitate clinical, administrative, education and training, and other stakeholders' outcome. So it's very complex. So changes may be initiated to fulfill specific purpose. Like, for example, if they want to introduce new therapies, or if they want to expand hospital service, or some more offering services hospitals are planning to offer. or they want to implement any recent regulation, some changes that had happened, they want to implement that, or anything, they want to modify their daily activities. So these are the changes that can, that can be planned and that should be implemented. But then when these changes happen, it may affect the other department as well, other function as well. And change is at the same time, change is very important because it is part of improvement efforts. These are the things that we've identified. These are the improvement area we need to do. But at the same time, the change that is happening or anything we are trying to fix it, we also have to be sure that, how the other functions are affected. So the ultimate goal of any change is to basically ensure that organization is ready, willing, and able to function appropriately in a new environment. Whether it is change in whatever, the whole system or quality management, or, taken over by different hospital entity, they come up with their own system. So these are part of change management, how the organization is dealing with these kind of management. The 9th is teamwork. So teamwork, of course, should involve all members of healthcare organization. Nobody should be left behind as such, as well as an individual in broader care community. Even people not directly on the headcount of hospital, I would say, but are working for the hospital, even they should be involved as a team when situation arises or to provide their input. Then the 10th one is compliance with requirement. So compliance with requirement from government and licensing agencies are mandatory. So that is something that any organization or hospital has to do it. Furthermore, if healthcare organization, they have an option of seeking voluntary accreditation or certification. They want, additional some certification or whatever. So when they have decided that, they want to do this, the decision is made. So they have to pursue the path. So to pursue the path, they also have to look into the quality management system and what all the requirements that are required, what are the requirements to get that accreditation or certification has to be in place. They need to work forward for that. So then outside of the circle, we see overlay. So I don't know whether it's clear, but it says indicates continual improvement and innovation. So the integration of continual improvement and innovation is critical throughout all the aspects of the model, from core, middle, outer circle, everything, for better patient and business efficiency. So basically, we have to superimpose continual improvement and innovation to all the circles. So by superimposing, these two essential approaches, like continuous improvement and innovation, the model, it makes it clear that it must be applied to all the different parts. So continual improvement is an action basically taken throughout an organization to increase the effectiveness, because anytime you spot some issue, you've identified that and you're working on it to improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of activity. And then it also adds added benefit to patients, stakeholders, and organization. And continuous improvement basically it's a key. Basically, it's a key thing, a key aspect of total quality management, and it is based on the principle that there is always an option for opportunity for improvement. So every time, so this is a continuous cycle. We cannot say that, okay, fine, now we have a QMS in place, everything is okay. No, it can never be completed. There is always a chance. There is always an opportunity for improvement. So this has to be a continuous process. Then coming to the innovation part, innovation is needed more than ever now in healthcare settings, especially now we have seen that in COVID situation, how much do we rely on digital things. So this is something that people are working, getting used to it and coming up with, more new ideas, how this can be dealt with. So innovation plays an important role in quality management system. So this is just a diagram that I have shown, and there are a few things that I have listed down. You can go back and have a look at it. And here are some of the references from quality management and, some from medical journals also. You can refer that if you're interested. So basically these things I have taken it from these references. You can always go back and refer. So I think, yeah, that is all from my side for this session. So Dr. Divya.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for this wonderful learning experience we had in the session. Ma'am, there are 2 questions in the Q&A. So if you could just look at it, it would be nice, ma'am. We can take a break for a few minutes and assemble back at 6:35 for the next session.
Dr. Divya?
Yes, ma'am.
I think once the Q&A is done, I think can we continue, Sabha? Ms. Sabha?
See, there are two questions I see. How do we define quality? So I think, defining quality here, this session, we are basically more at a high level, not at the basic level of quality. I think you can find anywhere in your text what exactly is quality and how will you define that, is basically, there are so many definitions, like on top of my head, I can't remember, like, design to fit and so many things are there. There are multiple definitions of quality. How do we define quality? So there's no one definition as such define quality. Then transition of care, to elaborate on it. Example, transition of care, I mean, once a patient from one department, like, suppose from billing, once a person is admitted, so his details, they take the details, and then depending on the hospital, like what is the procedure? Like, for example, I would say a classic case of, Tata Memorial Hospital here in Mumbai. So what is, first the patient is going to be registered. That is the first thing. And then how is that? How the payment is going to be made and what all documents are required. So that is first thing. And then accordingly, they're going to assign doctor. That will be the second. So these are all the transition of care. If, whatever the treatment they're getting, if it's not okay, or they want to, direct to another doctor, physician. So that will be third. So these are the transition of care, how they are, how the patient is moving from one step to the other. I'm sorry, can you use, we'll share the slide with you. You'll have it with you. Yeah, you'll get it. I think everything has been addressed, or are there still any questions?
No, ma'am, it is addressed. I think if you don't mind, then shall we start the second session?
I'm okay. I mean, depends on the students. I mean, I'm fine. Is it okay? I can start. I don't have any problem. Because it's
sure, ma'am, we'll start.
Okay.
Curiosity is one of the permanent and certain characteristics of a vigorous intellect. Madam, over to you for approaches to QMS, risk analysis, and challenges in documentation. Ma'am, you can start the second session, madam.
Yes, I'll just minimize this video so that it doesn't take my screen. Okay. So coming to risk-based thinking. So here the second session is approach to quality management system risk analysis. So here we are going to talk about risk management tool and in general about risk-based thinking. So what is risk-based thinking? So in context of ISO 9001-2015, risk-based thinking replaces what was called preventive action in the previous standard version, where ISO once gave preventive action a separate clause. You can read that, sorry. Okay, I'm not going to read it. Okay, so it now incorporates risk throughout. So risk-based thinking requires company to evaluate risk when establishing processes, controls, and improvement in quality management system. So this had become a major activity of any company, any activity that is started. So they have to look into these aspects of risk. So it's important to know that risk isn't limited to negative possibilities. So company can also use risk-based thinking to pinpoint opportunities which represent positive side of risk. But then exactly what does ISO mean by risk-based thinking? So risk-based thinking is not the same as risk management. So automated risk management tools can help you incorporate risk thinking into your process, risk-based thinking into your processes. So risk-based thinking is an integral part of a process approach and PDCA cycle. So you must plan and identify all risk, implement corrective or preventive action, check to ensure mitigations were effective, and act to continuously improve the process. So fundamentally, you have to look at two viewpoints. The first is sources of risk, and then once you identify the risk, you get rid of it. So to identify the risk, first identify the risk, which should come from the customer's requirement. What do customer want? So that is the first thing. So here we go to the, sorry, next slide, hold on. Okay. So here tools for risk-based thinking. So it's root cause analysis. Root cause analysis basically is defined as a collective term that describes wide range of approaches, tools, and techniques used to uncover causes of problem. Before conducting a root cause analysis, it is important to understand that the team can take various approaches. So examining each approach and choosing the one that is best fit. Maybe I'll go into it later, but I'm just, trying to give a brief about this, about root cause analysis. So examining, you have to examine each approach and then choosing whichever method is best or whichever tool you're using is best for successive analysis. So when performing root cause analysis, be sure that you are, looking for the best approach. So there are different approaches. I'll go through that and then explain in detail. So the goal of root cause analysis is to recognize all the underlying causes of problem. And then using the analysis method is a useful tool to accomplish this task. So different tools that we have, we talk about it in subsequent slides. So in the next slide, that can help in recognizing underlying cause of problem. Okay. So here, what are the attributes of root cause analysis investigation? So root cause analysis investigations basically have four main attributes: thoroughness, a complete review of all possible causes that is required, and then fairness. So all staff members associated with the incident are required to participate. So it should not be that, calling just limited or favorite people or somebody who's very smart, just calling those people and, getting into RCA. So that is not the right method. And efficiency. So the time taken to undertake the investigation should be consistent with the significance of the problem being investigated. So efficiency, how quickly you can come up to root cause, to identifying the root cause. So it should not be like for a small problem, you're taking 1 month or, even 15 days time. It's not worth it. So again, it depends, what is the problem? How big is the problem? So that you can improve your efficiency accordingly. Then independence. So independent team members should be involved in the investigation to reduce the impact of bias and ensure impartiality. So some independent person has to be there to say, okay, fine, whatever reasons that they're giving is okay, it's acceptable. Because many a times it happens, people who have in the department, I would say, or in function where they've identified their issue, they try to cover up and coming up, with some a different reason or maybe a lighter reason that may not be the right thing. So it's always important to have an independent person's view, what that person thinks about the issue. Then coming to the next slide, steps in root cause analysis investigation. So basically, the major step in root cause analysis investigation are to verify the incident and define the problem. Like confirm and define the problem. What is the problem? Is there a problem? First thing is that. And then commission the root cause analysis investigation. So identify individual or team to investigate the issue. You have to, in small organization, it's still okay, but in bigger organization, it's important to basically identify some people or somebody in the team or, in other team to come together and then identify the issue being delegated for this activity. So map a timeline, like event causal factor chart. Establish a timeline from the normal situation to the time a problem occurred. Like how much time? Like suppose this, issue happened between 8:30 to 10 o'clock. So what all activities are performed at that time? So it's important to map the timeline and then to identify. That becomes easier to spot the issue. Then identify critical events. Then analyze the critical events, like conduct fact-finding investigation, like interviews, chart, literature, those kinds of things. And then identify root causes and contributing factors. So, okay, sorry, the example that was coming to me was kind of complicated, but okay. So let's look at each approach. So the event and factor causal analysis approach is used for major single event problem. So in this approach, team gathers evidence quickly and methodically. They establish a timeline leading to an event. So for instance, working at cleaning event, one of the equipment got fire. So the team investigates, putting all the evidence together. So after you have established the timeline, you can identify the causal and contributing factors. Now support each root cause with evidence. So evidence is important. It's not something that they feel. They have to show, okay, these are the evidence, this is why it had happened, something to be documented. Identify and select the best ways of addressing the problem. Like what can be the best way of addressing the problem? So develop recommendation. What recommendation? Something. So here this continuous improvement approach thing comes into picture. What is a recommendation? Something that they try to improve, not just for one particular issue, they also have to look into other aspects, whether the problem that was identified is actually, impacting other functions also, or other, I don't know, other equipment or other department, whatever. It can be anything like that. So recommendation should be based on that level. Of course, for the issue as well as, a broader level also, it has to be identified. Then write and present the report. That is important. It has to be presented very well. What were the issues? Who did it? What all things that we have seen above, everything has to be listed down with all documentation. So then coming to root cause analysis method. So I just listed down 5 popular root cause analysis method. There are many tools are there. So one of the simplest one is whys are the problem solving strategy that consists of asking why did this problem happen, and then following the answer up a series of additional but why questions until you get the root cause of the problem. Like for example, a training record. Like training record was incomplete. So what can be first why? Like individual did not attend the training. First thing is that. Visual way to map cause and effect. Then coming to failure mode and effect analysis. So failure mode and effect analysis is one of the first systematic method of failure analysis. So it's a step-by-step guide for recognizing all potential failures in a product. Business process or service. So once you've pinpointed each individual failure in a system, you can then assess the effects of those failures one by one. Then for one FMEA, that is failure mode effect analysis, is used during the design phase of product and processes. So it's used to identify potential failures and the consequence. So basically each failure mode is assigned a value of occurrence, like, how frequently is it occurring? And then what is the severity? Is it too severe or is it okay? Its severity is low. And then the detectability, that is multiplied, and it gives risk priority number, OSD RPN. So RPN can be used to prioritize high risk items. So if there are failure modes with similar or identical RPNs, address the high severity items first. If they're having the same number, like, suppose if we give a number, if it's 50-50, but then we see if, the risk of one is more than the other one. So prioritize the one with higher risk. And use the resources to the best place to reduce the risk. And last thing is that if you have changes, keep track of them. Then next slide is Pareto analysis. So this type of analysis is statistically way of solving problems. So it involves identifying a few fundamental causes of problem that must be addressed in order to solve the majority of complication. So what basically it says is that it assumes that 80-20 rule, which says that 80% of problems are produced by only a few serious causes, 20%. So this is also one of the way of identifying what are the issues, doing risk analysis. Then coming to risk register. So risk register can be used to log all identified risk in a system and their control. If there are any risk. So in many companies, we see step by step, individual step, they list down each and every risk. If a person is not there, if a person is absent, even that they have listed down, who will be the backup. If, there is some failure, what will happen? So there are so many risks that people, when they start working on this FMEA approach, they list down all possible risks that comes to their mind and they put it in the risk register, not FMEA, I would say risk register. So FMEA will come later. So the risk level can be assessed before and after risk mitigation. So when they identify everything in the risk register and then, they assign a number and then accordingly it can be mitigated. Risk having, higher risk. Then coming to fishbone. So fishbone this is also called as Ishikawa diagram or cause and effect diagram. So this RCA tool is a visual way to map cause and effect. So the spine of the fish skeleton in the middle you see of the diagram represent the specific problem. And then the rib bones of the skeleton that branch out from the spine represent potential causes. So yeah. So I think this is the simplest one. This is the primary cause, and then secondary cause, something like, phi hows we discussed. So basically you can use phi how to this kind of, root cause analysis. So you can use different kind of, so here, maybe I'll just go back and explain. So here it's not that, there are so many phi tools, so you have to use only one tool. It's not like that. You can use multiple tools. You have to see the combination, like, after this, what you're going to use. For example, like fishbone I've explained, you can use five eyes for this, or, 5 eyes or 2 hows for that. That is another tool. Then for failure mode effect analysis, you can also go to fault tree analysis. That is another tool I haven't listed here. So there are multiple tools that are there. So depending on the situation, you have to identify which tool you need to use for that problem. Then, yeah. So you can use, so what to do, like, how are you going to do this? Basically, try to be creative. So do not use any preconceived notion. So the reason may be different from what you've seen earlier. It may not be the same. So some people come up with the same mindset. Okay, this is the issue. Probably that should be the cause. So it may not be that case. It may be some, isolated case. So sometimes it's not a systemic finding. It may be an isolated finding. So always don't think, have come up with a preconceived notion, or, that this is the problem and this should be this root cause. No, don't throw out idea prematurely. Think about it. Is this the best thing that we're trying to come up with this idea when we do brainstorming? Don't jump to conclusion and solution. Don't jump to it. Think about it. Discuss with the team, because this brainstorm, people come together, they provide their input, and it's just an open talk. Just talk aloud and come to a decision. Then try to involve as many people as feasible. So many people can come in, they can provide their input, because people from varied background, when they come, they see their point of view, their perspective. So it's important. Actually, it's good to involve different people, from different functional group. So as an auditor, many times we have made certain that, we agree to auditees that this is the finding. However, when they had performed root cause analysis, and when they come up with, implementing corrective and preventive action, so the team realized the issue was completely different. So most of the time the issues are systemic, but there may also be isolated cases. Then the next one is testing. So basically testing is testing of the countermeasure should be in small areas, so that the countermeasure does not solve the problem. The negative impact of test is limited. So here, testing is that, like in big manufacturing company, usually it happens, and depends. It depends on the risk, depends on the cost, whatever. So whenever there are any changes, if they've done brainstorming, they came up with a solution, probably this might have been the issue. So they take a sample of it, do the testing. So when they do testing, they have to make sure that, everything is addressed, whatever was discussed. So in a small area, and if countermeasures should be solved to problem, negative impact of the test is limited. So probably that may not have been the right solution. So the whole thing should not get impacted. Now the test result need to be studied to see if the countermeasure is effective. Now this is very important. If it is effective, it also has to be studied to understand, what is the right way, what happened. So many a times people skip this step of studying countermeasure, what it was implemented, and how it should be done. So after studying only, they realize whether this should be implemented to other areas or not. So study phase is one that is often neglected and not well done. So if necessary, modifications to the countermeasure may be made and retested. So if there are any modifications, then countermeasure, it has to be made and retested, and it follows the same step of retesting and then countermeasure and, study phase, and then it goes to the implementation stage. Then coming to implementation stage. So the new solution method needs to become the new standard. So everybody has to be aware of it. Okay, this is the new standard. These are the changes that I made. This is, that was the root cause, and this was what identified, and this was the solution. And now we're implementing this process. So we need to understand what else will the solution work. So probably the issue that is identified for scenario 1 may be applicable for other scenarios as well, which might have till now got undetected. So it's very important to understand and have a look at other processes also. So whatever is done implementation, and then document the process. What was the process? What was the change in the process? So that has to be documented. Then lastly is quality assurance. So have a formal, well-defined audit procedure. So anything that has been changed, it has to be audited to understand the process is correct. And, to analyze any variation from expectation. This is more in manufacturing, we see that. But any step, any processes that you are implementing, any new tool, everything has to be audited to make sure that it is okay, well to go. And usually during audit times, we come up with a lot of feedback kind of thing that certain things has to be changed. So it's very important that before a new process is implemented, it should not immediately go into manufacturing state before getting audited. So audit is a key component. Quality assurance has to be in place to perform audit, and whatever the reports and after the audit has to be documented, and the recommendations that were given by the auditor. So yeah, I think it's done. I tried to be fast. Any questions?
Thank you, madam. It was a very nice session. There are few questions in the Q&A, ma'am. If you could just take it.
Okay, so madam, we discussed 10 points. On what basis the 10 points have been? Okay, so these 10 points are basically taken from ISO guidelines. So in your career of 20 years, can you give example of quality, innovation, and creativity? Oh, there are so many. I basically come from clinical research background and not from hospital. Yeah, but there are innovation. There are so many. Every now and then, like for example, in clinical research, if you see, especially at this time, in a COVID pandemic situation. So how we have been auditing remotely, even innovation. Yeah, you can say, using what is that name of that brand that our company uses? Some kind of Google glasses, something like Google glasses. We provide it to the hospital, so they can wear that. They can go through the source document, medical chart, and we can sit here at home and we can review the documents. So that is one innovation that we normally use. We are using it. Even though it's very expensive, we are using that for audits. Then how to decrease discharge time of patients by application of, discharge time is something that is identified. So basically, when you talk about, there is certain, how can you say discharge time of patients by application of quality? You have to identify the patient has been is staying back for a longer period of time, and how you can reduce that. If it is there in the protocol, if the patient has to stay for 5 days, well and good. The patient has to stay. If it's been discharged before 5 days for any reason, probably it has to be documented. So I'm not very clear. So that is what you're trying to say, Mohammed Ibrahim. How to decrease discharge time of patients by application? So application of QMS doesn't come. It is more of an operational part. Then are you going to share PDF slide on WhatsApp? I'm not going to share on WhatsApp, definitely. Secondly, what is ISO 9001?
Okay. There, I would like to add, ma'am, we have shared it with the IT team, and all of you all will be getting it to your mail. You'll be receiving an email of the PDF of the slides that are there.
Okay. So what is ISO 9001 is basically a set of criteria for quality management system, and it's the only standard in the family that can be certified. Like, it's basically a criteria. Like when you look into ISO 9001, there are different criteria. The one in the outer circle, if you see, so leadership and everything that I have listed down, feedback and other things. So that has been taken from ISO 9001, and I have also shared the link in this presentation, so you can go through that link. It is freely available online on web. You can get more of information. So commission of root cause analysis, please elaborate. Okay, so commission basically is that commissioning root cause analysis, you have to identify the person who will be responsible for doing root cause analysis. Is that clear, commission? Or just let me know if it is unclear, because that is how, you identify a person who's going to perform root cause analysis. Sometimes it can be simple. Suppose, for example, based on audit findings, suppose my auditee, the person, I'm coming up with an issue. So that person responsible for that particular function will be responsible for performing root cause analysis. Is that clear? Then FMEA is prospective and RCA is retrospective. Is it type of RCA? Both are root cause analysis tools, basically. Prospective and root cause analysis is retrospective. Yes, you can say that. Yeah. Root cause analysis tools, basically. FMEA basically used for identifying. See, FMEA basically when you prioritize or whatever. So it can be both. Suppose a scenario is given to you that this is the scenario and some case is given to you. So when you are given a case, you have to identify even before the start implementing the operational activity. You still have that opportunity to come up with an FMEA. Like for example, you're planning a meeting somewhere. So for that also you can beforehand you can come up with a FMEA. Okay, this can be the risk or any activity. Suppose the speaker is not coming, what is the risk? How much? What is the probability that the speaker won't be coming? So accordingly you can calculate that. So it's not necessarily prospectively or whatever. I mean, you can do it even before, later, nothing like that. Then I hope it answers, Priyanka. Then which of the methods of problem analysis would you recommend for use in resource constrained primary healthcare settings, and why? So resource constraint, when you talk about, you're talking about headcount, you're talking about finances, what? So problem analysis, when you do which method of, because this is more, strategically, this another tool basically at leadership level that they use. So Terence, I think you're going at a very high level. I haven't listed down those tools, but there are some activities like that is managed by leadership team. And they do it. So basically, which of the methods of problem analysis will for use of resource constraint primary health? So this will be, identify what resource crunch are you talking about and why. So if there's something that is unclear, Terence, please let me know. Just put it in the chat box. Then how QMS is different from clinical research in hospital? QMS is basically a set of criteria for quality management system. So clinical research and hospital, how is it different? Okay, so Dr. Manasri Kumar. Okay, so just to let you know, in India, we don't have that prevalent thing of having quality management system, but in other countries, like for example, I would give an example for Russia. So the Russian Health Authority has made it mandatory that every hospital performing the clinical research should have a quality management, quality department, and they should also have a quality management system in place. So when we do audit, we also look into the hospital quality management system, whether they have appropriate things, that we need for clinical research. So it's not different. It's basically part of it. Quality management system is anything, part of the documentation. It is SOP, it is training record, and everything is a part of quality management system. So what additional course an MBA healthcare student should do to make career quality management clinical research? So I think this is not, sorry, Dr. Manasvi, this is not directly related to the topic, maybe some other time. Then Nafisa, who helps you to establish a QMS in a hospital? Should it always be external consultant? No, not necessarily. Yeah, but external consultant, especially when it comes to hospital, not everybody is trained. But normally they take support of external consultant who can guide them, who can basically drive what is required. They are not going to be there sitting and, writing it down. They basically they can do that. Of course, if it is assigned to them, many times it happens that also. But then they also, it's the hospital, it's the organization who is going to decide, what they want and what they don't want. So whatever is their requirement, and finally, what is customer's requirement? Well, what is the vision and vision of the hospital? What is the mission? What is the goal to achieve? So quality management system is developed on basis of a lot of criteria, not just one. So basically, this information has to be shared with external consultant if they're hiring one, and then they're going to develop these things. If the hospital wants somebody else to do it, external consultant. Normally in the company, the internal people who are working on that, they work on this quality management system. There is a separate department. I hope that answers Nafisa. Then Anwar, are quality management system developed by different healthcare setting standards, or is it unique to a company philosophy and goals? By different healthcare setting standards, I can understand. Or is it unique to company philosophy and goals? See, quality management system is developed by different healthcare. See, basically, it depends what you're looking for. I mean, suppose if the hospital is looking for some kind of, basic accreditation that the hospital needs to have to operate. So first they have to follow those mandatory regulations. So that is the first thing. And then if they want to go ahead with, additional certification like ISO or any other certification that they want to go ahead with hospital, then they have to work and identify what all additional, things that they need, what kind of documentation, what kind of processes that they need to implement. And that has to be documented, because to get these kind of certification, they also have to prove that they have these systems in place. So our QM is developed by different healthcare setting standard. I mean, basically, what is required required for all the hospital. And besides that, if they want to go ahead with other different certification, then they can go ahead with that. Or is it unique to company philosophy and goals? It's nothing. Philosophy and goals, some requirements are mandatory. So if they want to do something more, it's up to them. Have I answered any more questions? Okay, yeah, it's there. Tanu Ghosh. Is there a mistake done by people make when they attempt to find the root cause? Is there a mistake done by people make? Is there any mistake done by people make when they attempt to find the root cause and all? Mistake done, of course, mistakes people do. That is the reason we have listed down one of the point here is that they should have like people from different background, try to involve as many people as possible. So that is, if there is mistake, the other person can stop, stop there, or try to provide their input. So this is basically brainstorming session to identify where things are, why this problem had occurred. So is there a mistake? I think that is what you asked. Then move here. What is difference between record and document? Document is a single document, and what is a record? I mean, you're basically maintaining. It can be file, it can be anything. Difference between record, maintaining a record. Then Ashpia, how is Pareto charts used to improve quality? So here basically you have to see, because this is interesting, but there are too many things to it also. Like for example, in simple term, for example, auditing, I would say. Most of when we perform a quality review, annual quality review, or we look into it, what are the issues? So most of the time what we see is that there are some areas, like for example, documentation. So there are some areas which, are repeated many times. In almost all the audits, we'll see that these are the issues with documentation. So there are other things like, like for example, when it comes to clinical research monitoring, there are some activities that is not done properly. Filing is not done properly. So most of the finding, the 80% of the finding may be related to these three categories. You're getting the point? So this is how that we have to identify what are these issues. And once we try to identify those issues, the root cause, that is there, like I'll go back to the slide. So here it says that assumes 28. If it says that 80% of problems are produced by only few serious causes. So this may be the 20%, basically. The 20% is basically the culprit that is causing 80% of the problem. So when we, try to identify what this 20% is and try to work on that area and try to mitigate the risk, and then we also have to check, how much of risk is mitigated. So that is when we use Pareto analysis. It's basically into not necessarily into clinical research in this, but we see in other more at high leadership level. We see using this kind of chart when we're presenting something at high level. For management meeting, management committee meeting, normally we'll try to highlight, at a high level that these are the issues. Then Galaxy tab, how to reduce the complexity of QMS in hospital. Complexity. Basically, when you say complexity is one by one, first of all, you need to identify what you're going to do. It's not complex if you see as such. When you're looking at this, requirements, that 10 things that I've listed elements. But complexity is that first you identify what you want to do. And once you've identified what you want to do, you start documenting. So I think this is something maybe I can talk about it later, or yeah, basically in short, I can say that this is how you can, reduce complexity, but it's still not clear. What do you mean by complexity exactly? Are you thinking about something that is coming to your mind about complexity? Maybe you can elaborate on that. I'll try to reply. Then Purnika, which is the most used root cause analysis method in hospital among the popular one listed? So in the hospital, I would say Dr. Divya, Dr. Mumta, you are the best person probably to say that. But normally it is root cause analysis that is done. I have never worked in hospital setting, so I cannot answer that. Then Geeta Devi, any questions? No. Okay. So is that all or anything else? Any other questions do we have?
Since there are no more questions right now, probably we can start the third session on clinical trials and GCP.
So we'll take a break of 5 minutes. You want?
Yes, ma'am. I think she does.
We can take a 5-minute break and then come back, ma'am.
Okay.
We can start by 7:10. Indian Standard Time of 7:10.
Yeah, so 4 minutes to go. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. 4 minutes to go. Sabha, madam, can we start the third session?
Yes, just a sec.
Okay. Welcome back, all of y'all. The third session will be on the clinical trials, GCP, audits and inspections. Those people who develop the ability to continuously acquire new and better forms of knowledge that they can apply to their work and to their life will be the ones who will be motivating the society to learn for indefinite future. Over to you, madam, for the third session.
Yeah, thank you. So, okay. Yeah, hello everyone. Okay. So here in this session, we are going to talk about good clinical practice. So broadly, we are going to cover ICH E6 guideline, audits and inspection, and good documentation practice. So these are the topics for this. So we'll go one by one. So first topic is ethical and regulatory context. So just to let you know, because I have tried to, focused on Indian regulation, because I have to give one example of the health authority, how it works and what are the requirements. So it is very close to ICH E6 guideline, which is applicable for all the countries, I would say. It's a guideline. Then we'll start off with principles. The principles of ethical and regulatory context. So GCP is an international ethical and scientific quality standard for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting trials that involve participation of human subjects. So that is a gold standard. So to begin with, clinical trials should be conducted under the most global principles of GCP, ICH GCP. Then coming to Nuremberg Code. So this was the first international instrument on the ethics of medical research, and it was promulgated in 1947. So as a consequence of the trial physicians who had conducted atrocious experiment on unconsenting prisoners and detainees during Second World War. So the code is designed to protect the integrity of research subject. It sets out a condition for ethical conduct of research involving human subject, emphasizing the voluntary consent of research. So here I have listed down the first one. The voluntary consent of human subject is absolutely essential. And the rest, you can find the link at the end of the slide. You can go through it. There are other, 10 principles that are listed. And then Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it was adopted by General Assembly of United Nations in 1948. So it also has a legal and moral force, like deals with protection and rights and welfare of human subject participating in scientific instrument, in experimentation, sorry. Then Declaration of Helsinki. So this was issued by World Medical Association in 1964. So it is fundamental international document in the fields of ethics and biomedical research, and has influenced the formulation of international, regional, national legislation and codes of conduct. So when we talk about these things like, Nuremberg Code or Declaration of Helsinki and those things, so basically any guideline that we read that is pertaining to human protection, so everything is basically taken from this. These are the principles, and that is how country specific they are developing their guidelines, what they want. And then it's good clinical practice. So the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirement of Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, that is ICH. Basically, it's what they had done is they've brought all the regulatory authorities and pharmaceutical industry to discuss scientific and technical aspects of pharmaceuticals and develop ICH guidelines. So there are, too many countries. You'll see the whole story. The link is there at the end of the slide. You can go through it. There are very interesting guidelines and related to everything. It may be manufacturing and operational and quality and safety. There are a lot of things in that ICH. But here we are focusing on ICH E6, that is ICH Efficacy 6 guideline that deals with good clinical practices. So now good clinical practice is divided into 5 main parts: IRB, that is Institutional Review Board or Independent Ethics Committee, investigator, third is sponsor, and then last part it deals with protocol, IB amendments and essential documents. So all the ICH guidelines are available on the website. So here, what I had done here is that I have given an example of the approval process, because the first step to conduct any clinical trial anywhere is to get approval from the health authority. So here as an example, I have given the steps that are necessary to get approval here in India. So clinical trial initiated only after permission is granted by DCGI. DCGI is the Health Authority of India and Ethics Committee. So no study can be started without their approval. They cannot do it. And then there is a requirement to register clinical trial at clinical trial registry before enrolling first patient. Then, so basically what happens, submission is done parallelly. Like one dossier is submitted to DCGI Health Authority and the second one to Ethics Committee. There may be multiple sites involved in that. So there might be 10 different ethics committee dossiers submitted. So normally DCGI is the first to give approval, and that follows with Ethics Committee. So whenever Ethics Committee is giving the approval, Health Authority has to be notified about it, that Ethics Committee has given the approval and now they can start off with the clinical trial. Then investigators should possess appropriate qualification, training and experience. A qualified person dentist who is an investigator or sub-investigator should be responsible for all trial-related medical decisions. Then labs used for clinical trials should be in compliance with good lab practices. So in case when labs are outside the country, so their name, address, and specific services is to be, should be stated in the protocol to avail the permission of using that particular lab. Then, if there is any amendment in the protocol, so protocol, I'm just, I don't know how many people have background of clinical research, so maybe I'm going too fast. I'll try to simplify. Just give me a second. Okay. So basically what happens is that when we are submitting the dossier to Health Authority, protocol is the main thing. Protocol basically lines up the, the whole activity that the sponsor is planning to do. Like how many, what all investigational product they are going to administer, what all products will be co-administered, how the study is going to be conducted, how many visits are going to be there, how many, how the monitoring will be done, how the quality assurance is going to be done, and how the statistical analysis is going to be done. So all this information about any clinical study that the sponsor is seeking approval has to be mentioned in the protocol. So that is protocol. Besides that, there is investigator brochure. So investigator's brochure basically includes everything, clinical and non-clinical information, anything if they know about the product, when they have, whenever they have done the study, animal study or in, early in human studies, whatever data they are getting, they have to put everything in investigator's brochure. And then they have case report form. Case report form is nothing, is basically when a doctor, a physician, an investigator is conducting the trial at the site. So according to the protocol, there are certain requirements, certain things that they have to enter it in case report form. So case report form, draft case report form, that also has to be submitted to health authority, because health authority would like to see what all data the sponsor is collecting, to conduct the clinical trial. And then there is informed consent form. So informed consent is basically, it is signed by the subject, that is patient, or subject's legally acceptable representative, or if the subject is illiterate, by then impartial witness has to be present. So these are the basic few documents that has to be submitted to health authority to get the approval. So besides that, what the investigator does is that there is a letter in according to Indian requirement, I'm talking about health authority, there's an undertaking. So in that, the investigator is going to list down, all the name, how many people, how many sub-investigators, co-investigators are involved in the study, coordinators, which lab is used, all the information, whatever possible from the site, they're going to submit that. It's kind of undertaking. They're submitting and saying, okay, fine, this is the information, and this is how we plan to conduct the study. And that would also include the investigator's CV, because DCGI has to see that the doctor, whoever is performing the study, is qualified. So PhD doctors cannot do clinical trial. Okay, then approval not required. So protocol amendment. Suppose if the study is started and they received approval from the health authority, there might be some change, something that they think the design is not appropriate, it may cause some problems. So they go ahead and, change the protocol. So they have to amend the protocol, and this amendment should also be approved by health authority and ethics committee. So in certain cases, approval is not required, like, to eliminate immediate hazard. This patient life is in danger, so immediately, they'll do something, whatever the investigator thinks is the best based on his or her discretion. And then logistic changes or administrative changes, notify within 30 days. If there is a name of change of the person or location, anything that is changed, they can notify in 30 days. Then sponsor responsibility. The sponsor is responsible for all the stages of clinical trial process, from designing the protocol and CRF and planning the analysis to analyzing and preparing interim and final clinical trial report. So what is clinical trial report? So clinical trial report is after the trial is done, study is done, all the data, all the results are basically compiled and then submitted to health authority. So that dossier is called, document is called clinical study report, CSR. So the responsibility of sponsor is to utilize qualified individual, physician, biostatistician, clinical pharmacologist as appropriate throughout the stage of trial. So it is a responsibility of sponsor. They have to check that they are properly qualified. Then appoint qualified, knowledgeable, and reliable monitors. Monitor is somebody who oversees the trial in the hospital, at hospital level, at the site, and CROs as well. They have to appoint CRO. Suppose they're outsourcing some of the activity, the vendor, they also have to check if the vendor is qualified enough to perform that activity. Then select qualified and experienced staff, investigator, that is doctor. Educate and train investigator team about GCP and trial. So it's important that sponsor, whoever is deciding whether it's Sanofi or Pfizer, they have to make sure that the clinical team is trained on GCP and on the study protocol trials. They monitor the progress of all clinical investigations and activity. It is a responsibility. They cannot just, if they're delegating some activity to the vendor, they cannot sit back and say, okay, no, we have given this activity. No. Ultimate responsibility lies with the sponsor. So they have to ensure that everything is, they have to monitor all the activities. Then ensure continuous IP safety evaluation and adverse drug reaction reporting. So, for example, any trial vaccine, for example, I would say that is given, like for many times internally we have a committee. So every 6 weeks or every 1 month, they try to look into all the safety data, any side effects they're having, adverse events they're having, and they try to evaluate that internally, what is the cause. So this is more of a continuous kind of oversight that sponsor is having on adverse drug reactions reporting. unexpected to investigators. So then, I'm sorry, it's a huge topic and I have to somehow crush in 30 minutes. It's challenging. Anyways, so now coming to the responsibility of monitor. So basically, monitor is at the forefront of, is the person in contact with the study physician, that is the investigator. So he is the person who goes to the site, he looks into it and ensures that the trial is conducted properly. So what monitor is going to do, he's going to schedule regular monitoring visit throughout the trial, maybe once a month or once in 4 months, depends on the study. He'll go and oversee if the trial is conducted properly. And then what is his responsibility? So he'll verify the CRF that I spoke about, the data that is collected from the study, CRF, against original source document. They'll look into all the medical chart, if whatever they have entered in case report form is actually matching with the medical record, for quality, consistency, completeness, accuracy, and timeline. So verify accountability, processing, and storage of products and sample. So they have to check accountability, how many doses were given to patient, is there anything missing, or maybe, it was misused or it was taken for some other study, something like that. So they're responsible for verifying investigational product. Then verify protocol compliance. Check, all the activities of the protocol has been, they have been compliant with. Then discuss any problems with investigative staff. If they find any issue, they have to discuss that. And then finally write a report and send a follow-up report to the site, to the investigator. Okay, these are the issues, he has already discussed with that, and please try to address these issues. Then sponsor. Okay, sponsor is responsible for implementing and maintaining quality assurance. Then I'll talk about it later. Then annual status report. So basically, how is the study progressing? Every year they have to submit. Then premature discontinuation, they have to provide the reason and summary whenever they decide to discontinue. Sponsor is deciding to discontinue the study within 3 months' time. They have to inform the health authority that this is the reason why we discontinued the study. Then investigator comes to physician's responsibilities. So information of subject and documented consent. So investigator has to clearly, inform the subject. Okay, this is the study he's participating, he or she is participating. What does it involve? About all the risk and everything they have to inform, and also document the consent that they agree to it and they're signing the consent. Then investigator is responsible to conduct the trial according to protocol and GCP. Protocol, of course, they have to follow the protocol. These are the kind of guidelines. They have to follow that. And of course, GCP, which is the standard of good clinical practice. Then compliance as per the undertaking, the one that I mentioned, compliance, because this undertaking is submitted to health authority and they have to be compliant with that. This is, kind of similar to Form 1572 that they use in US. So ensure adequate medical care is provided to subject, records and reports, source document and data. Source document may be medical chart or, X-ray sheet or, ECG record or anything, and data. Then CRF completion. So basically CRF is there with the sponsor. So the information that is required in the CRF is necessary for evaluation. So they have to see that, the CRF is completed. Investigator has to take the responsibility of ensuring that. And if there is any serious adverse event, they have to immediately report that. And they are also responsible for informing ethics committee and sponsor if there are any SAEs, serious adverse events. Then investigator responsibility is management of IP. They should have good knowledge about the product. What is this product about? What does it contain? Accountability, they have to manage it properly. They cannot just leave it in open space. Then storage, how it is stored. Is it, as per required temperature requirement, -25 or, 2 to 8 or whatever. Use the product according to the protocol, how it should be handled. Everything is according to the protocol. Respect for randomization, blinding procedure. So randomization, maybe one is getting X, the other one is getting Y. So whether it is managed properly. Then sample management, samples, basically serum sample that they're collecting, how it is collected. Is it collected as per the protocol? How is it stored? Then comes the responsibility of ethics committee. So ethics committee shall approve clinical trial protocol without prior registration with, no ethics committee. I'm reading wrongly. Okay. Without prior registration with DCGI. So basically what happens when they're submitting the dossier, when the sponsor is submitting the dossier to health authority, they are provided with a registration number. So whenever they submit the document, the dossier to ethics committee, they have to provide the registration number also. So ethics committee review and evaluate protocol for possible risk of subject expected benefit. So ethics committee, basically, we all know that what they do, they just have to evaluate everything is okay, safe for the subject, what are the risks, benefit, or is there anything that they would recommend to change the protocol? Maybe it's too harmful for the patient. To ensure privacy, confidentiality, and justice, it is maintained. So they have to look into that. It's not, these are the criteria. Basically, as a lay person or legal person, sitting in the ethics committee, looking into these criteria. Then analyze and forward essay report to central licensing authority. They have to do that. This is Indian requirement. Then ongoing review of trial based on periodic study progress report. So they also have to monitor how the physician, how the investigator is conducting the trial at this site. Then what is the composition? So ethics committee shall consist of not less than 7 members with medical, scientific, non-medical, non-scientific, including layperson. So for India, chairman will be outside the institute, member secretary, and then one non-scientific member, and then appropriate gender representation. Then ethics committee can have its member individual from other institution. For example, they don't have an expertise or they don't have a pediatrician, so they may call somebody from outside the institution. Then members should be conversant with provisions of clinical trial and the Indian regulation. They should know what is the requirement. Then quorum. So what is quorum? Basically, how many people should be present to take a decision? So at least 5 members. And out of this, 5 should be medical scientists, clinician, legal expert, social scientist, and layperson. So these are the 5 people who should be present. If the committee doesn't have these people for the approval, that means the ethics committee approval is invalid if they don't have these people on the committee for the approval of the protocol. Then ethics committee is also responsible for maintenance of the record. All documentation, communication, ethics committee are dated, filed, preserved as per the SOP. And the constitution and composition of ethics committee, they have to write down how they're doing. CVs should be there, SOPs should be followed. All national and international guidelines they should have. Then copies of protocol, data format, whatever was submitted to them, they have to archive that. All correspondence with committee members, investigators regarding application decision, an agenda of ethics committee, how frequently they have, what was discussed, what decision was taken. Then, agenda? Okay. Then meeting minutes, copies of, so I won't go through it because I'm just, for the sake of time, you can go through it. I think it's self-explanatory. But yeah, so there's a time period. Every ethics committee has got a time period for how long, as per the regulation, how long they have to retain the data, archive the data. So that is important, and they should have everything. And many a times, at least Indian Health Authority, when they come to the site, they also look into ethics committee. They have interview sessions with ethics committee and look into their documentation and the practices, how they are managing. Then informed consent process. So what is informed consent process? Freely given informed consent by each subject. They should be ready. They should give, it's up to them. They should not be, forced in any way or, try to give some incentive, nothing like that. So these are the requirements, provide information, study verbally, as well as using patient information sheet. So the doctor, whoever is there, is going to explain the patient that this is about the study, and they should also provide a sheet so that the patient can go and look into it, and it should be non-technical so that they can easily understand. Then for India studies, it's a requirement of AV recording of informed consent process. So these things also should be clearly recorded. Then inform subject about the rights to claim compensation. They should also be aware how they can approach in case of compensation, in case of injury or death. Then they should also be provided with the contact person of sponsor anytime they think something is wrong. So they have a copy of ICF. ICF has a number of sponsor representatives. They can always call them up. Then patient information sheet and ICF should be approved by ethics committee. Any changes in ICF should be approved by EC and submitted. Okay, so this is self-explanatory. So in case the subject is not able to give informed consent, some problem is not in a condition, or if it's an infant or for kids, so usually it's parents who are giving the consent, so they become legally acceptable representative. If LAR is unable to read, then impartial witness is required. Now there is a checklist of essential animals to be included. Now this, I'm talking about Indian Health Authority, what is their requirement? So as per New Drug and Clinical Trial Rule 2019, Health Authority is provided with a checklist, and all the information, whatever is there in the checklist, should be part of informed consent document. Then coming to source documentation. What is source documentation? Now source document, original documents are certified copies. Now this is the first place where data is captured. So it can be anything. It can be diary, it can be medical chart, it can be anywhere. So original documents, data, and records should contain certain specific information about participant and trial. Then source data, all information contained in source documents. Like what was the, what was the temperature, what was the height, or whatever. Sometimes doctors, they have a habit of writing it down in the diary and then, putting in the medical chart. So basically the diary becomes the source. That is the first point. Then examples, informed consent form, like some example of source documentation: informed consent form, diary card, medical chart, enrollments. These are the things that directly they're capturing the information in this document. So randomization list, confirmation email, log, products, IP dispensation form, sample identification list, temperature storage record. What is the temperature? So for which subject is this sample? How is it going to be shipped? So those things are source documentation. Then what is the requirement? So the requirement of source documentation is accuracy, completeness, legibility, and timeline of the data. So direct access to data. So basically, sponsors should have direct access to data, and monitors, auditors, they should have direct access to data. Then CRF data derived from source document consistent or discrepant to be explained. So if there is any discrepancy, they have to explain why it is different. Then this basically I'm talking about what is the requirement and how it is managed. Because many times we see discrepancy, they're taking information from somewhere else. So this also has to be explained, and that becomes a source documentation. It is signed by the physician investigator that, this is how it was done. Then change correction record online, one line through, they just strike a line and then enter the new data with initial date and explain, if necessary, why was this change made. Changes made by original entry person or authorized person, unacceptable correction method, it should not be there done. Then obliteration correction tool should not be used. Then coming to electronic record source documentation. So in case where electronic medical records are used, the system has to be validated. It should be 21 CFR compliant. And then, it should be limited, secured, and confidential system access should be given. So generation of accurate and complete copies of records. Just a second, give me a second. I'm sorry. Yeah, validation is basically to ensure accuracy, timeline, reliability of the data that is entered, and then limited access. Only the authorized individual. For example, the monitor CRA should have access only to trial subjects and not other data. And then generation of accurate and complete record, that is printed copies in electronic form, should be legible and suitable for inspection, review and copying of, because many times what happens, the study gets over, and when we take out the record, so it should be, legible and good enough to be used for audit and inspection. Then long-term access and protection record, how, access should be maintained once the study is over, and then health authority comes to inspect, how it is maintained and how the records are protected. So they have to look into those criteria also. Then audit trail has to be there, where any modifications made, computer generated timestamp should be there. So those are certain requirements of electronic record. Now, what ensure good documentation? By knowing how do you ensure? You should know the protocol, what is required. Investigators brochure, everything is there in that. Case report form guideline, how do they have to complete it? And what are the lab procedures? Is there any requirement, for how many minutes they have to keep the sample, and then, centrifuge and those things. Then sponsor requirement. Does sponsor has any additional requirement? They want, their way to methodology to be followed. Then, of course, they have to ensure to regulations and guidelines. That is, of course, important. Then coming to inspection. So as per health, DCGI Health Authority, I would say, these are the, things that, these are the areas, I would say, where inspection can be performed. Like it can be sponsor, vendor, subcontracted vendor, anybody. They can just look, inspectors can go anywhere and they can have a look at their system processes or whatever the activities that are outsourced. And they should allow officers to enter with or without prior notice. Many times in India, they just show up or just call up an hour before, or if they're kind enough, they can inform one day before that there's going to be inspection, or they just simply show up most of the time. So everybody has to be ready when it comes to inspection here in India, at least. So in case of failure to compliance, DCGI will issue a warning letter what all the deficiency and recommend that study be rejected or continued if there is some fraud. Then suspend or cancel clinical trial permission. They won't give the permission. And debar investigator, sponsor, including the employees, contractor, and sub. So they can debar. They'll say, no, this investigator is not doing the trial ethically. It's not correct. You know, some manipulation, some fraudulent thing is going on at the site. So they can also debar the investigators. Now coming to quality assurance. So audit is quality assurance is basically how do sponsor have this quality assurance oversight at the site by performing audit. So normally what is the process? I've just listed down, it may not be required. So normally, you know, we have an opening meeting, we discuss, you know, what is the agenda, what are we going to do during the audit? And then finally, after doing the audit, we have a closeout meeting, we share our preliminary findings, and then we go back, you know, discuss with the sponsor team, internal team, and these are the findings and what, so they are the one who are going to coordinate with the investigator and come up with corrective and preventive action or perform root cause analysis. And then finally, when everything is addressed, then we have audit closure. Then, yeah, so some of the deficiencies I have listed here is, you know, missing essential documents like logs and those things are missing. Inadequate. So essential document basically in ICH E6 guideline, Section 8, you'll have a list of documents, essential documents that are required for the conduct of clinical trial. So basically, when I say essential documents, it means all the documents that are listed there. And of course, it also depends on the country regulation. Inadequate and inaccurate source documentation, failure adhering to protocol or GCP, inadequate product management, IP is not managed properly, then delayed reporting of SAs. These are very common. Then ethical deficiency, lack of informed consent form, ICF was not used, verbally they said, and you know, the subject started enrolling without signing the ICF. Then basically influencing the subject, okay, fine, you know, we are giving you vaccine that is costing, the cost is 10,000 or so, you can come and, you know, get it done. So it should not be, they should not be influenced in any way. Then undue pressure to participate in clinical trial because, you know, I'm taking care of your kids, so it's better you come to me and then this, or else, you know, I'm not going to take good care of the patient. So they may, many times they say that. So there are certain things that, you know, they should be mindful of. These are the things, ethical deficiency that has been spotted, putting subject at unnecessary risk and fraudulent data. Then coming to GCP, sponsor have a procedure in place for managing, okay, this comes to, I mean, this is more of a technical thing at sponsor level. So basically, sponsor has a procedure for managing non-compliance. What happens if there is a serious, you know, non-compliance or fraud or misconduct? What is the action? What sponsor is supposed to do? So I've just listed down here. I'm not going to get into it for the sake of time. And then here I have differentiated what is the difference between audit and inspection, what normally inspectors do, and what audits, you know, what is our focus. So audits basically independent part of sponsor. It's an official basically by regulatory agencies, auditors, inspectors, and we detect non-conformities with our requirement, and inspectors observation on with regulation basically. So we can look into our operating guidelines and monitoring plan and other things also. Inspectors may not necessarily look into it. Audit reports, so this process is different, and for inspection normally, you know, they provide with a what you call letter, inspection report, and then they ask for response and action plan, what the sponsor is going to do. Then may result in notification of misconduct, so the sponsor may notify ethics committee and regulatory authority, whereas if it is spotted during inspection, then legal action can be taken. So I think that is all. I'll try to quickly, any questions? I'm sorry, I was tried to be fast and there was too much of information. So if you all have any questions, then yeah, there are.
Ma'am, you can look into the Q&A, ma'am. There are around 7 questions that are there.
Okay, so give an example. Sorry, I can't now. For FME and pharmacy and nursing. So there'll be many. Right now, I'm not working in hospital and just nursing, so I may not be the right person, you know, top of my mind to think about it. But FME, there are many. I mean, for pharmacy, you just can think about any problem and you'll come up with a risk. So it's nothing so difficult. Any area that you're working on. So if there any issue, you just identify and then, you know, you come up with an FMEA. If protocol procedure is amended, what system is placed to ensure right docs are in circulation? Galaxy tab is saying that. So what is, just a minute, it's going up. It's protocol procedures if protocol procedure is amended. What system I ensure right documents are in circulation? So yeah, whenever there is a protocol, right, in circulation, what do you mean? Because nobody can implement the protocol if there is an amendment. Suppose today I decide, okay, there are certain things that we need to amend in the protocol. So even though the sponsor know that these are the issues, unless we get approval from health authority and ethics committee, we cannot implement that. Okay. So without that, ensure right docs of circulation. I mean, how many people have you to circulate? You are going to circulate to the investigators. Of course, they already have a copy because they are the one who are the point of contact with ethics committee. So they already have a copy of protocol. And once they receive the approval from ethics committee, so there is a protocol signature page that is signed and handed over to investigator saying that they have read and understood the protocol. Then what is the duration of storage of record? So it depends, varies from health authority to health. In India, it's very less, like 3 years or 5 years, but it depends on the sponsor. It depends on the country. Some have 20 years, some have 15 years. So you need to check, what exactly you're looking for in this scenario. Then Prince Divakar, okay, I was in life support for a week, okay. Hospital is taking admission for those depositing 1 lakh, okay. Doctors are not visiting COVID ward and my treatment is dependent, okay. Nursing staff is not giving cost injection, but it is okay. Need a valuable comments regarding hospital administration with respect to today's webinar topic. I mean, I'm sorry, Dr. Divakar, this is, I think, kind of, personal case. So we are not discussing that. If there is something that is related to the presentation, I would be glad to answer. Then Linda, please, are you sending us a slide of everything that is being discussed here? Because I missed some discussion due to network fluctuation. Thank you. Yes, you will be receiving the slide. Any other question? Have I answered everything? Dr. Divya, Mamta, is there anything that is pending? I think it's all.
Thank you, madam. I think most of the questions have been answered. Thank you for the wonderful learning experience. Dr. Divya?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, madam. No more questions. Anybody has any other question, you can just type it in the Q&A. The capacity to learn is a gift. The ability to learn is a skill. The willingness to learn is a choice. Benjamin Franklin aptly said, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn." Now I request Ms. Kanakavalli to summarize the sessions. So if there are any other questions, kindly put it in the Q&A. So after this, Sabha Madam can answer those questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Sabha Siddiqui, ma'am, for the excellent content delivery on quality management systems. Now I'm here to summarize today's sessions. So firstly, in session 1, we have discussed about quality management systems and various components, then the coordination that is required between all the components, such as strategic leadership or compliance with the standards, environment, and the communication, the transparency between the systems and the coordination for a successful quality management system functioning in the hospital. Followed by in session 2, we have learned about various tools for risk-based thinking and the tools for root cause analysis, such as Pareto's analysis or Ishikawa's diagram, and the countermeasures to make risk analysis a successful process. Session 3 was a detailed session on ethical and regulatory guidelines for good clinical practices, which include requirements for the clinical trial, the process of clinical trial and the approvals that are required, and responsibilities of sponsors, monitors, and investigators, ethical committees, and the process of informed consent, and the role of good documentation in clinical trials as well. And I really cannot summarize the number of questions that you have answered. And the content really added value and an add-on to your presentation, ma'am. And thank you once again. And over to you, Divya, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Kanaka. There is one more question, ma'am. Sabha Madam?
Sorry, I muted myself. Okay. Is there an essay? Is there a time frame to report it according to ICHGCP? Basically, any SAE has to be notified to sponsor within 24 hours. So that is a requirement. Initial reporting has to be there. and then investigator, like, and sponsor, within 14 calendar days, they have to report. So it again depends on country to country requirement.
Thank you, madam. Success is always achieved by ordinary people with extraordinary determination. And we have always learned that difficult roads lead to beautiful destinations. Hence, be the change that you wish to see in the world and make your organization a better and safe place for all by implementing quality practices. Through the eyes of gratitude, everything is a miracle. The real gift of gratitude is that the more grateful you are, the more present you become. Now, I request Dr. Sujay MJ to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Divya. As we come to the end of today's webinar's program, on behalf of the entire MBA Hospital Administration, MBA Pharmacy Administration, our BBA Fraternity of Jesus HER, we thank His Holiness Jagadguru Sri Shivaratrishwara Deshikendra Mahaswamiji for his blessings. I thank our Honorable Pro-Chancellor Dr. B. Suresh and Vice Chancellor Dr. Surinder Singh, Jesus Academy of Higher Education and Research, for their encouragement and guidance for our educational developments. I also wish to express my sincere thanks to Dr. B. Manjunatha, Registrar JSS-AHER, Dr. P.A. Kushalappa, Director Academics JSS-AHER, Dr. Colonel M. Dayananda, Director JSS Hospital and Dean, Faculty of Management Studies at DHSMS, Dr. M.D. Ravi, Professor Pediatrics, JSS Hospital, Mysuru, and our today's guest speaker, Ms. Sabha Siddiqui, who is also a clinical project manager, quality manager in Sanofi Passion. Ma'am, most of the topics are quite relevant to our course and the syllabus, and definitely it is helpful for our students, ma'am. Thank you for your patience in answering all the participants' questions. And further, I express my sincere thanks to Dr. Ravindra, CIO, IT JSS-AHER, Dr. Mamta HK, Coordinator, Faculty of Management Studies, DHSMS, and our students, attendees, and online learners of MBA Hospital Administration. Thank you very much. Thank you, one and all. Over to you, Dr. Divya.
Thank you, Dr. Sujay, for proposing such a wonderful vote of thanks. Thank you always expresses extreme gratitude, humility, and understanding. Thank you for listening. Thank you for participating. And thank you for being a great audience. Thank you once again from all of us from Management Studies as well as JSS-AHER family. Thank you, Sabha Madam, for taking your time off and giving such a wonderful session. And thank you, Dr. Mamta, for organizing the whole effort. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Divya, and a special thanks to Madam Sabha from our end. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabha Madam.
Okay, thank you all. I mean, I hope it was helpful.
Definitely,
I know I tried to speed up things at the end, but yeah, I tried to give as much as possible information, and I hope it will help students. Yeah, and thank you for this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you once again, ma'am.